So imagine you are a tech executive, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Your company is just entirely out of cash.
Like zero runway left.
Exactly, zero. I mean, the bailiffs are literally carrying the desks and the chairs out of your office just to pay off your debts.
Just an absolute nightmare scenario.
Right, and you are facing this total catastrophic public ruin. So what is your next move? Do you call your lawyers?
Probably a good idea.
Or do you sit down with your employees and explain the situation?
Most rational people would do one of those two things, yeah.
Right. Or do you take your company-funded Ferrari, drive it out to a barn in the remote countryside so the debt collectors can't find it, and then go out for a lavish dinner like absolutely nothing is happening?
Which is just, it's genuinely a staggering psychological response to failure.
It really is.
But we see this, time and time again in corporate collapses, though honestly, rarely with this level of theatrical absurdity.
Yeah, the theater of it all is wild.
Because you have to understand, when a high-profile business goes under, it is almost never a sudden, unpredictable lightning strike.
Right. It's not a surprise.
No, it is a slow, methodical poisoning of the company from the inside out. And it's usually driven by unchecked ego.
And unchecked ego is just, I mean, it's the absolute lifeblood of the story we are unpacking today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in today's deep dive, we are looking at the spectacular, basically soap opera level collapse of a company called Imagine Software.
Such a fascinating case study.
Right. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the early 1980s tech scene in the UK, Imagine was not just a successful company.
No, they were the kings.
They were the undisputed darlings of the entire industry. I mean, they were widely known as Britain's best-known micro software company.
Yeah, they essentially brought this, rock star swagger to what was, until that point, a cottage industry.
Yeah, it was very DIY before them.
Exactly. Before Imagine, British video games were mostly made by, introverted teenagers.
Right, just kids coding in their bedrooms on those rubber-keyed ZX Spectrums.
Right. But then Imagine's software came out of Liverpool, and they projected an image of absolute corporate dominance.
Yeah, they were heavily branded as the Liverpool Whiz Kids.
And they lived up to that branding. I mean, they had the glossy magazine ads, the incredibly aggressive marketing, and just this aura of immense, untouchable wealth.
But the illusion completely shattered.
It did.
In 1984, seemingly overnight to the outside world, this titan of the British micro software scene was completely and totally bankrupt.
Just gone.
And to guide us through this wreckage, we actually have a phenomenal piece of source material for this deep dive.
We do. It's so good.
We are looking at a vintage magazine column called Newsprint, and it was written by this incredibly sharp industry critic named Guy Cuny.
And Cooney's perspective here is just an absolute goldmine for anyone interested in business history.
Yeah, because it's not looking back, right?
Exactly. He wasn't writing a sanitized retrospective book 10 years after the fact. He was on the ground in 1984 watching the disaster unfold in real time.
With the people causing it.
Right. He was surrounded by the very executives who were actively trying to spin the narrative. It's like he was watching the building burn while the architects stood out front trying to sell him blueprints for a new penthouse.
That is such a good way to put it. Cuny perfectly captures that bewildered, almost cynical perspective of an industry insider who just knows the math doesn't add up.
He's not buying the spin for a second.
No. And he poses this central mystery that really frames our entire conversation today. He says, look, nobody is denying that Imagine ran out of cash.
That is just an observable fact.
Right. The question he's asking is, who spent the money and what on earth did they spend it on?
Because the disappearance of cash, it is always just a symptom. The terminal disease is always found in the who and the what. And Cuny, he's trying to piece this puzzle together for his readers, and he walks directly into what we might call the fog of war of corporate failure.
Oh, totally. The sheer volume of conflicting information he had to deal with is fascinating.
It's dizzying.
Okay, let's actually unpack Cuny's experience here. Because his interviews with the leadership at INI, imagine they sound less like journalism and more like, I don't know, couples therapy for people who violently hate each other.
That is painfully accurate.
He literally writes that nobody involved seemed inclined to tell more than a little truth at a time.
Yeah, just drip-feeding reality.
Right. He had to sit through these long and bitter speeches from the various directors. And you would think, okay, they're executives, they're trying to save the brand.
You would hope so.
But no. They were exclusively detailing the amazing deceit of each other.
It is wild. Every single director sat down with him to explain the collapse, And naturally, every single one of them claimed they were 100% innocent of any wrongdoing.
Of course. It wasn't me, it was the other guy.
Exactly. It completely mirrors the dynamic of a high-stakes, incredibly messy divorce. The objective timeline of events is always the first casualty.
Yeah, the facts just go out the window.
Right. You are no longer getting a unified public relations strategy. You are getting the raw, desperate survival instincts of executives who are just terrified of personal liability.
If you are listening to this and you've ever worked at a startup, during a boom cycle maybe, the Web3 frenzy a few years ago, or even the current AI gold rush, you've probably seen a milder version of this exact dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. It happens every cycle.
When the funding dries up, that whole "we're changing the world together" rhetoric, it vanishes instantly and the knives come out.
Because that survival instinct completely overrides objective reality.
Right.
The truth in those bitter speeches that CUNY had to listen to had completely mutated. It was no longer a recounting of facts.
What was it then?
The truth had just become whatever narrative best deflected legal and financial ruin away from the person speaking. When the bailiffs are literally at the door, the executive brain abandons the company and goes into pure self-preservation mode.
Okay, I hear that, but I'm looking at how deeply these guys bought into their own mythology, and I really have to push back a little and wonder if it's purely calculated malice.
Interesting. What do you mean?
Like, is it possible that none of them actually knew the full financial picture because they were structurally siloed in their own delusions?
Ah, I see.
If you are a self-proclaimed whiz kid, right, and you're just high on your own marketing hype, maybe you genuinely believe the finance guy ruined it because you intentionally refused to look at the balance sheets for 2 years.
You know, that is actually a highly plausible reading of that specific culture, because when a company operates almost entirely on projecting unrelenting success, communication fundamentally breaks down.
Yeah, you can't show weakness.
Exactly. There is zero psychological safety in that boardroom to raise your hand and say, hey, our burn rate is totally unsustainable.
Nobody wants to ruin the party.
Right. So department heads build walls. Marketing just assumes finance has a secret war chest. Finance assumes the developers are, a week away from $1 million product launch.
So they're all flying blind.
So when CUNY interviews them, their shock and their blame might actually be genuinely authentic, because they had spent months willfully blinding themselves to the reality of the situation.
Wow. It's just willful ignorance crashing headfirst into financial gravity.
That's exactly what it is.
And that's why CUNY is such a perfect guide for this deep dive, because he isn't buying a single word of their individual innocence.
Not for a second.
He's looking at this circular firing squad, and he's actively trying to trace the bullet holes back to the actual bank accounts.
Which, requires tracking the first major financial hemorrhage.
Right, where did the bleeds start?
Because a company with Imagine's market share doesn't just lose its war chest on a whim. The collapse really required a systemic failure. And CUNY's investigation points us directly toward a massive, catastrophic contract failure.
Okay, let's lay out the facts of this, the Marshall Cavendish quagmire, as CUNY presents them.
Let's do it.
So Marshall Cavendish was a massive, highly successful publishing company, and they approached Imagine Software with what honestly should have been a dream deal.
An absolute layup.
Right. They were launching a computer part work publication.
Which, just to provide some quick context for that term, a part work publication was a very popular publishing model in the UK at the time.
Yeah, explain how that worked.
It was a serialized magazine, published weekly or monthly, where the reader basically builds up a collection over time.
Like those build-a-model car things.
Exactly like that. You might collect parts to build a model car, or in this specific case, you collect an encyclopedia of computer knowledge just piece by piece.
And as an incentive to get people to actually buy the magazine every week, Marshall Cavendish wanted to give away simple, basic computer games on cassette tapes that were physically mounted to the front cover.
Right. Just a little freebie.
So they hire Imagine to write these simple games, and they front them a staggering £200,000 advance to get it done.
I mean, we really need to pause and appreciate the sheer scale of that advance in 1984.
They're massive, right?
It is. For a micro software company back then, £200,000 in liquid working capital was an astronomical sum.
It's life-changing money.
It was an absolute golden ticket. It should have provided them with a massive runway and secured their operational costs for a very long time. It was basically a guaranteed white label contract.
Yeah. You are handed a fortune to write basic, throwaway games for a magazine cover. It is literally the easiest money on the table.
So easy.
But according to Bruce Everest, who was Imagine's marketing chief at the time, the original concept was, and I'm going to use some heavy air quotes here, improved on.
Oh no. That phrase alone should just send a shiver down the spine of anyone who has ever managed a project.
Seriously, improved on. Everest tells CUNY that Marshall Cavendish started demanding that these simple giveaway games be playtested to the absolute highest standards.
Okay.
He claims the publisher wanted the exact same quality that Imagine would demand for their top-tier £5.99 commercial blockbuster games.
And right there, we are witnessing a fatal failure of boundaries.
Yeah.
You have a straightforward contract for a functional, low-stakes promotional item, but somehow that simple deliverable completely morphs into a resource-draining pursuit of perfection.
It's crazy.
This is the dictionary definition of scope creep, but on a scale that actually threatens the existence of the company.
And the result is an absolute financial bloodbath. Imagine burns through the entire £200,000 advance.
Gone.
They just vaporize a fortune trying to get these magazine games up to this mythical standard. And specifically, they pour all this money into a single game called Pedro.
And this is where the mechanics of their failure become truly horrifying.
Yeah, it gets worse.
Because they haven't just spent the money, right? They have fundamentally failed to fulfill the terms of the contract.
Oh.
The advance is gone, but they still legally owe Marshall Cavendish more games under that original agreement.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Because if I'm an executive, right, staring down that £200,000 hole for a magazine giveaway, my instinct is to immediately halt production.
That's the bleeding.
Call the publisher, aggressively renegotiate the terms, or just cut my losses and walk away entirely.
Which would be the sane thing to do.
But Imagine doesn't do that. They execute an incredibly desperate, almost hallucinatory pivot.
They completely double down on the delusion.
They really do. They go to the public and announce that Pedro, this game that was explicitly designed to be given away for free tape to a magazine, is actually Imagine's best ever game. They decide to self-publish it as a premium commercial title. And to settle the disaster with Marshall Cavendish, Imagine promises to pay back the £200,000 advance in installments over the course of a year.
Okay, let's just unpack the sheer insanity of this financial maneuver.
Please do, because it breaks my brain.
They took a low-risk contractual obligation. They over-engineered it until it consumed their entire cash reserve.
Right.
And then they decided to gamble the company's entire reputation by rebranding this compromised, over-budget side project as their flagship consumer product.
While taking on a mountain of debt.
Exactly. All while agreeing to saddle themselves with £200,000 of debt to the publisher.
I have to ask you, based on everything CUNY is exposing about this company culture,
Yeah.
do you actually buy Bruce Everest's excuse here?
About the publisher.
Yeah. Was Marshall Cavendish really being an unreasonable, tyrannical publisher demanding perfection for a freebie? Or is this Imagine software suffering from monumental hubris and just a total inability to manage a basic budget?
Oh, looking at the psychological profile CUNY builds of this company, I lean entirely toward the latter.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Think about it. When your entire corporate identity is built on being the untouchable whiz kids of the industry, producing something average or basic causes immense cognitive dissonance.
It hurts their brand.
It damages the ego. It is highly probable that Imagine's own developers and directors simply couldn't stomach releasing a basic game with their glossy logo on it.
Ah, so they did it to themselves.
I think so. So they over-engineered it, they burned the budget to feed their own perfectionism, and then they conveniently blamed the publisher for having high standards just to mask their own financial incompetence.
Wow. That makes so much sense. And the punchline of this entire debacle, CUNY writes that if Pedro truly was the best game ever from Imagine, the general public completely failed to appreciate it.
Oh, totally rejected it.
The game was released to absolute silence. It was a total flop.
Oh.
So Marshall Cavendish is out their advance, Imagine is completely out of cash, and the market rejected the product.
It is a masterclass in how to turn a guaranteed revenue stream into a catastrophic dual-party loss.
Seriously.
They alienated a major corporate partner, they completely exhausted their liquid cash, and they severely damaged their brand equity with a desperate, subpar products launch.
Okay, so the publishing money is completely gone, and Pedro has bombed. But the general public, and even the wider tech press, they don't really know the intricate, embarrassing details of this Marshall Cavendish failure yet.
No, that's all internal.
Right. The public just sees a highly hyped company suddenly acting very, very erratically. So how did the directors at Imagine explain their sudden lack of funds to the outside world?
Well, this brings us to their grand illusion, the unified official corporate excuse.
There we go.
And this is where the narrative really shifts from catastrophic mismanagement to what looks like a coordinated campaign of public delusion.
Because according to CUNY, everybody inside the company without a single exception or voice of dissent rallied around one official story.
They all stuck to the script.
The problem wasn't their spending. It certainly wasn't the Marshall Cavendish disaster. The reason they were struggling, they claimed, was a massive, organized criminal conspiracy.
Just a wild claim.
They blamed software counterfeiting.
And CUNY does a really brilliant job in his column of dissecting this specific claim, because we really have to differentiate between piracy and counterfeiting here.
Yeah, explain the difference.
Imagine was using a highly specific industrial-scale threat to justify their financial collapse.
Yes, and CUNY's analogy here is incredibly sharp. He explains that piracy is a very localized, low-level issue.
Right.
Piracy is when, a kid buys a game on cassette, puts it in a twin-deck tape recorder, makes a copy on a blank C60 tape, and gives it to a friend at school.
Which eats into profits, sure, but it doesn't bankrupt an industry titan.
Exactly. Counterfeiting, he explains, is an entirely different beast.
It is a fundamentally different threat model because it requires organized logistics.
CUNY compares it to the fragrance industry.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
He says counterfeiting is like someone brewing a cheap knockoff perfume in a bathtub, putting it into a meticulously fake Chanel bottle, and actually managing to sell it through legitimate, normal high street pharmacies.
Right.
In the software world of 1984, it meant a criminal enterprise was mass-producing their own tape cassettes, professionally printing their own glossy inlay cards that looked identical to Imagine's packaging, and selling them in bulk to legitimate retail distributors for half the wholesale price.
And the truly insidious part of counterfeiting, as CUNY points out, is the contamination of the supply chain.
Yeah, the shops don't even know.
Exactly. The manager of a local computer shop who is ordering stock doesn't even know that half his inventory is fake.
Yeah.
The criminals have completely bypassed the consumer and targeted the distribution network itself.
Exactly. So Imagine goes to the press and basically says, look, we aren't failing because of our decisions. We are victims of a massive, invisible industrial crime ring.
Which is a very convenient excuse.
It is. But their proposed solution to this supposedly existential threat is where things go completely off the rails.
Oh, absolutely.
Enter the Megagame.
The Megagame. I mean, it just sounds like a vaporware concept ripped straight from a 1980s cyberpunk comic book.
It really does. Imagine announced they were going to defeat the counterfeiters by completely abandoning the standard cassette format.
A huge risk.
They were going to create massive hardware-software hybrids. These mega games would come with extra memory, additional ROM and RAM built directly into the cartridge.
Wow.
CUNY actually notes that if these things ever actually saw the light of day, they would essentially be little computers on their own. They were designed to plug right into the expansion ports of the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum.
Mechanically speaking, the logic is actually sound.
Is it?
Well, yeah. They are attempting to out-engineer the criminal element. Duplicating a standard audio cassette tape requires almost zero technical skill, but counterfeiting a proprietary, custom-built hardware cartridge with integrated microchips and memory expansion, that requires a dedicated fabrication plant.
Oh, I see.
It completely prices the street-level criminals out of the market.
Okay, that makes sense. But the ambition didn't just stop at the hardware security. Imagine claimed these weren't just games. They were supposed to be lifestyle experiences.
The hype was unreal.
They claimed you were going to literally live these games. The instruction manuals weren't going to be little pamphlets. They were going to be the length of short novels.
Which is just so unnecessary.
And the price tag for this experience, a staggering £40 each.
Which, it is difficult to contextualize today, but in an era where top-tier games cost between £5 and £7, asking £40 was astronomical.
It's absurd.
It's the equivalent of a modern video game suddenly costing $400. It requires a complete re-education of the consumer market.
And this is where we reach the absolute pinnacle of their corporate insanity. To support the research and development of these mythical 40-pound mega games, Imagine makes a strategic decision that defies all known logic of business survival.
It's just hard to believe they did this.
Because they claimed counterfeiting was destroying the cassette market, the company suddenly and completely stopped selling its normal cassette games.
They voluntarily shut off their own life support system.
I've been trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of this decision. It's like an airline facing a severe cash flow crisis because they can't afford jet fuel.
Okay.
So instead of restructuring, they permanently ground their entire fleet, they stop selling all tickets, and they invest their last remaining dollars into building a teleportation device in a hangar.
That is a perfect analogy.
It is innovating as a trauma response. How does a room full of highly paid directors approve cutting off the only source of incoming revenue?
Well, what you were describing is a very well-documented psychological trap in failing leadership.
Really? There's a name for this.
Yeah. When a company is drowning in a crisis of its own making, the mundane, painful work of saving it, laying people off, cutting budgets, renegotiating debt, it feels intolerable.
So they just avoid it.
Exactly. So the leadership becomes obsessed with a silver bullet. The Megagame was never a coherent product strategy. It was a psychological lifeboat for the executive team.
It allowed them to ignore the reality of the Marshall Cavendish debt.
Precisely. It allowed the directors to stop focusing on their failing cassette sales and the angry creditors, and instead focus all their energy on this glorious, futuristic hardware revolution that was going to change the world.
It's an intoxicating distraction.
It is, but financially it is suicidal. You
Yeah.
cannot halt your core revenue stream to fund an unproven, capital-intensive hardware product in a highly volatile market.
It's betting the farm on a ghost.
They were betting the entire existence of the company and the livelihoods of all their staff on a prototype that didn't even exist yet.
So the Megagame was the unified public story. It's this grand, heroic narrative of victimization by criminals and a bold pivot to the future.
Very heroic.
But CUNY, our industry critic, is sitting in these rooms, and he knows the math is completely broken.
It doesn't add up.
Even if you factor in the Pedro flop and the expensive Megagame R&D, it does not account for the sheer terrifying velocity of the cash they were burning.
No, it doesn't.
The real drain was happening entirely off the balance sheet.
The Megagame was just the shiny object meant to distract the press. The real story was what was actually happening to the corporate treasury.
And this is where CUNY's investigation strikes gold. The directors, behind closed doors, start leaking the unofficial theories to him.
This is where it gets so good.
We are entering the territory of internal sabotage, supercars, and a severely abused corporate credit card.
This is where the unified front completely collapses and the executives turn on each other to save themselves.
So one faction of directors corners CUNY and claims that the entire counterfeiting story is actually missing a sinister internal element.
The plot thickens.
They claim that a single rogue director among their own ranks was intentionally sabotaging sales and destroying relationships with distributors.
Sabotaging their own company from the inside. To achieve what, exactly?
According to this faction, the rogue director wanted to deliberately crash the company's valuation.
Why?
The plan was to weaken Imagine to the point of total insolvency. Then, when the receiver took over the company, this director could swoop in as an independent entity and buy the intellectual property and assets back for pennies on the pound.
Wow, we should probably clarify what the receiver means in this context, just because it's crucial to UK insolvency law.
Yep, we do.
When a company can no longer pay its debts, a licensed insolvency practitioner, the receiver, is appointed by the creditors. Their only job is to liquidate the company's assets to pay back the people who are owed money. So this theory suggests an executive was intentionally triggering receivership just to execute a hostile cut-price buyout of his own assets.
It's ruthlessly cynical.
It's literally corporate treason.
It is. But wait, because the counter theory from the other faction of directors is somehow even more damning.
Oh, tell me.
This opposing faction tells CUNY that the sabotage story is absolute paranoid nonsense.
Okay.
They claim the sabotage rumor is just a smokescreen designed by the other executives to hide the real reason the money is gone.
And what is the real reason?
Grotesque, unchecked, systemic executive compensation.
Ah, this is the moment CUNY finally answers his own opening question. Who spent it and on what?
Yes. The numbers CUNY uncovers are genuinely staggering,
Yeah.
especially for 1984. Let's break down the sheer scale of the extraction here.
Let's hear it.
First, you have director's fees set at £40,000 a year.
In the early 1980s, £40,000 was a massive executive salary.
Massive.
It is particularly egregious for a company that is actively defaulting on its debts and has voluntarily halted its primary revenue stream.
But the entitlement doesn't stop at their own salaries. On top of the £40,000, CUNY discovers there were directors' wives' fees of £10,000 a year.
Oh, wow. Putting spouses on the payroll is the ultimate red flag in forensic accounting.
Is it?
Absolutely. It is a classic hallmark of a leadership team treating the corporate treasury like a personal piggy bank.
Yeah, just taking whatever they want.
It demonstrates a total breakdown of corporate governance. I mean, there is clearly no independent board oversight asking, what operational value are these spouses providing to warrant a £10,000 salary while we are being hunted by debt collectors?
Exactly. And yet we haven't even reached the crown jewel of their financial mismanagement.
There's more.
Oh, yes. Alongside the inflated salaries and the phantom spousal fees, Kinney uncovers company-paid credit card spending to the tune of £5,000 a month.
£5,000 a month?
Yep.
On an American Express card in 1984.
I genuinely want to pause on that number.
Yeah.
If you account for inflation, that is a staggering amount of discretionary spending.
It's unbelievable.
What are you even physically buying in 1984 Liverpool to rack up £5,000 in 30 days?
I can't even imagine.
You are a software company that has failed to deliver a magazine game. You have stopped selling cassettes entirely, and your executives are swiping the plastic for thousands of pounds every few weeks.
It just reveals a deeply toxic culture where the projection of success became more important than the actual reality of the business.
Yes.
This is what happens when the hype of being a whiz kid overtakes any sense of fiduciary duty.
They bought their own hype.
The credit card isn't being used for purchasing server hardware or funding marketing campaigns. It has just become a tool to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth, to keep up appearances, even as the core foundation of the business is actively rotting from the inside out.
And CUNY provides these incredibly vivid, almost cinematic details of how this illusion manifested in reality.
He paints such a picture.
He gathers these anecdotes from the whispered confidential comments of the staff. He hears stories of directors standing outside their large houses, just talking to their supercars for 2 hours at a time.
That detail is deeply unsettling, honestly.
It's so weird.
But it paints a perfect picture. It shows executives who are entirely disconnected from the human cost of their failing business.
Yeah.
They are clearly more emotionally bonded to the metallic trappings of their wealth than they are to their employees or their actual creditors.
CUNY specifically mentions the fleet of vehicles. We are talking Lotus cars, Ferraris, superbikes.
Serious hardware.
This wasn't quiet, understated wealth. This was aggressive, performative, in-your-face spending. But my favorite anecdote, the one that truly highlights the absurdity of the situation, is the story of directors taking those exact same company-funded Ferraris and Lotus cars and parking them way out in the remote countryside so the bailiffs wouldn't seize them.
It is the absolute zenith of cognitive dissonance. You are a company director demanding a £40,000 salary and a £5,000 monthly expense account, but you are physically hiding your sports car in a barn because you know your company is insolvent and the courts are coming for the assets.
It's hilarious and tragic. And while they are playing hide-and-seek with supercars in the mud, CUNY reports they are actively lying to potential financial backers about non-existent bank loans.
Just compounding the fraud.
They are stirring up trouble among their own creditors, literally trying to persuade them that the money Imagine owed them would never be paid.
Wait, why would they do that?
Basically trying to manipulate the creditors into forcing the company to wind up. And simultaneously, these directors are secretly trying to poach their own staff to start rival breakaway companies.
It is total unmitigated anarchy.
Complete chaos.
It is the behavioral profile of a company in the final terminal stages of a death spiral.
Yeah.
There is no longer any collective, unified effort to save Imagine software. Every single director is operating as an independent, hostile actor, just trying to extract as much value, cash, or legal protection for themselves before the final bell rings and the receivers take over.
CUNY sums up this absolute circus of deceit perfectly. He writes, and I quote, "Frankly, I didn't even try to make up my mind who was telling the truth. Even the police, who I know were looking into a previous episode in Imagine's history, would have trouble finding evidence to support half these tales."
When the situation is so convoluted, when the finger-pointing is so intense that a seasoned investigative journalist and the actual police can't untangle the web of lies,
It's bad.
you know, the corporate culture wasn't just flawed, it was structurally designed to be deceptive.
Which brings us to the final act of this tragedy.
The grand finale.
With the bailiffs literally hunting for their sports cars in the countryside and the credit cards finally maxed out, The remaining directors hatch one final, breathtakingly desperate plot to escape the wreckage of Imagine Software.
This is the lifeboat strategy, and it involves some highly questionable financial mechanics.
Yeah, CUNY details what he calls the final chapter in the story of Imagine. 3 of the directors, allegedly using the company's own accountants, set up a brand new, off-the-shelf company.
Just out of nowhere.
Right. This new corporate entity is called FinchSpeed.
And we really need to explain exactly how this maneuver is supposed to work legally.
Please do.
Because it's a tactic that still happens today, often referred to as a pre-pack administration. The goal of FinchSpeed is a classic maneuver in corporate restructuring, albeit a highly aggressive one.
So what's the master plan here?
The master plan is that FinchSpeed, this completely new, clean company, will magically swoop in and buy the rights to the Megagames from Imagine Software.
Okay.
This purchase would supposedly inject just enough cash into Imagine to pay off the immediate aggressive debts and let these 3 specific directors walk away clean with the valuable Megagame IP inside their new company.
Sneaky. But what happens to the rest of the company?
Well, that's the critical mechanic here. By moving the intellectual property into FinchSpeed, they are abandoning the crippling liabilities, the toxic contracts, and the shattered reputation inside the hollowed-out shell of Imagine.
So they leave the garbage behind.
Exactly. And as CUNY acutely notes, they are also leaving behind a minority stockholder and one of the other directors who are explicitly excluded from this secret lifeboat deal.
Well, no honor among thieves.
Naturally, CUNY points out that shortly after this FinchSpeed deal was drafted, voices of intense dissent began to be heard from outside Imagine. The people left holding the bag of debt while the Golden Boys tried to escape with the intellectual property were not going quietly.
I wouldn't either. But there is a massive glaring flaw in this entire lifeboat plan, is there?
Oh, a huge one.
FinchSpeed is a shell company. It exists entirely on paper in an accountant's office.
Right. It has no money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As Keeney writes, this new company, quote, of course, had no funds so that it could buy Imagine's assets.
It's hilarious.
Let's just think about the absurdity of this for a second. It's a shell company with 0 capital trying to buy the assets of an insolvent company in order to save the executives of that exact same insolvent company.
They need real money to make the fake purchase look legitimate.
It is a financial house of cards built over an active volcano. So how do they attempt to actually fund FinchSpeed to execute the purchase?
They make a literal desperate dash to Silicon Valley.
You get on a plane.
They do. Ian Hetherington and David Lawson, 2 of the key figures behind this scheme, fly off to California to raise funds for FinchSpeed.
Do they have any leads?
CUNY notes they quickly realized that traditional finance would have taken 3 months of due diligence to arrange. They don't have 3 months.
No. Given the bailiffs are seizing their furniture, they probably don't have 3 days.
Exactly. But then, against all rational odds, they experience a massive stroke of luck.
I couldn't believe this part.
They somehow managed to secure a meeting with Atari. And amazingly, Atari actually offers to pay an unspecified but presumably massive sum for the U.S. distribution rights to the Megagames.
That is insane.
Dave Lawson later insists to CUNY that this Atari money absolutely would have saved Imagine. They had the deal. They found the silicon silver bullet.
It's a classic Hollywood moment. The music swells, and looks like the anti-heroes are actually going to pull off the impossible heist and escape with the loot.
It really looks like they got away with it.
But the universe has a profoundly dark sense of humor.
It really does.
Because the very day Ian and David are scheduled to walk into the Atari offices and actually sign the life-saving contract
Right.
is the exact same day that Jack Tramiel takes over Atari.
Just incredible timing. For listeners who don't know the history, Jack Tramiel was the former head of Commodore.
Right.
He was famously known for the, quote, business is war. He was an incredibly ruthless, highly efficient operator who absolutely did not suffer fools or bloated contracts.
And what is the absolute first thing Jack Tramiel does upon taking over Atari? Cutie writes, Tramiel froze all deals instantly.
It is a devastating irony.
So brutal.
The speed and ruthlessness of the tech industry, which Imagine had consistently failed to keep up with, suddenly accelerated and completely crushed them.
Yeah.
They thought they could outrun their bad management, outrun the bailiffs, and outrun their creditors just by changing the name on the door to FinchSpeed and finding a deep-pocketed buyer.
They thought they were smarter than everyone else.
But they completely underestimated the volatility of the macro environment. Tramiel's freeze wasn't even aimed at them. Imagine Software was simply collateral damage in a much larger Silicon Valley corporate takeover.
Looking at this timeline, I really have to wonder about their psychology in those final days.
Right.
Did they actually believe they could pull off this shell company maneuver, or was this just the involuntary thrashing of a dying animal?
I think it was fueled by an immense blinding hubris. When you have spent years projecting an aura of total invincibility, when you are driving Ferraris funded by creditors and expensing 5,000 pounds a month on a corporate card, you start to believe your own mythology.
You think you're untouchable.
You start to genuinely believe that the rules of financial gravity, insolvency law, debt collection, basic arithmetic, they simply do not apply to you.
The Atari deal failing wasn't the root cause of their collapse, was it?
No, not at all. It was just the final heavy door slamming shut on a maze of their own design.
And the way CUNY paints the final tragicomic end of the company is just haunting to me.
It's a great piece of writing.
He decides to call up Imagine Software to get an official comment on all of this chaos. The phone rings, and he gets the switchboard operator.
Okay.
And she tells him, quite plainly, there's nobody here, and the bailiffs have taken all the furniture.
Wow. It is a stark, brutal return to reality. The million-pound illusion is stripped away entirely, leaving a literal empty room.
But the delusion still powerfully lingers in the air, because that very same evening, CUNY somehow gets a hold of Eugene Evans.
Ah, Eugene Evans.
CUNY describes Evans as a super programmer at Imagine, and famously notes that he was a dinner companion of Margaret Thatcher.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. So this guy is exceptionally high up the food chain, a symbolic figure of British tech success, rubbing elbows with the Prime Minister.
And what is Eugene Evans' perspective on the fact that the bailiffs have literally repossessed the chairs he is supposed to sit on?
He is seemingly completely, utterly oblivious.
Really?
CUNY asks him directly, "Where are you all working?" And Evans, sounding genuinely puzzled by the question, replies, "In Tithe Barn House. Though we are working from home a lot."
Working from home a lot.
Yeah.
It is an incredible, almost poetic euphemism for a company that no longer physically exists.
Kinney ends his column with a devastating final thought that just captures the whole mess. He says, if he didn't know what was going on, how are the rest of us supposed to guess?
It perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of the situation.
It really does.
The internal information asymmetry was so profound, the silos were so thick, that even a star programmer dining with the Prime Minister was kept entirely in the dark about the fact that his company was a bankrupt, hollow shell.
So if we pull back and look at this entire saga, the collapse of Imagine Software wasn't just a story about a bad publishing deal with Marshall Cavendish, as disastrous as that 200,000-pound sinkhole was.
Right.
And it wasn't really about software counterfeiting, even if the criminals were mass-producing fake cassettes. It wasn't even entirely about the supercars hidden in barns and the astronomical credit card bills.
No, it was about the compounding, toxic nature of all those elements combined.
Exactly.
It was a corporate disaster born of massive feature creep, fueled by deep internal delusion, accelerated by entirely unchecked executive spending, and ultimately doomed by a structural, cultural detachment from financial reality.
And why does a story from 1984 matter to you today? Because it is a timeless, neon-flashing cautionary tale for any modern startup, entrepreneur, or business leader.
It absolutely is.
If you are watching a tech company today prioritize its optics over its operations, this history is highly relevant. It illustrates with terrifying clarity how easily the modern mantra of fake it till you make it can curdle into a culture of literally stealing from your own future.
Because the underlying mechanics of business change. I mean, we might be talking about cloud computing costs and AI hype cycles today instead of cassette tapes and Megagame cartridges, but the psychology of leadership failure remains remarkably constant.
Human nature doesn't change.
Exactly. The instinct to hide bad news in silos, the immediate pivot to unrealistic silver bullet innovations when core revenues drop, and the aggressive prioritization of executive lifestyle over operational stability.
We still see it.
We do. These are the exact same red flags today that they were 4 decades ago.
It all circles back to that slow-motion train wreck we talked about at the very beginning. You watch the crash, and you realize the disaster was inevitable. Because the engineers weren't even looking at the tracks. They were too busy arguing over who got to drive the Ferrari.
That is the tragic reality of hype-driven cultures.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. When a company's culture is built entirely from the ground up on rejecting an image of extreme wealth and unassailable success, Is it structurally impossible for its leaders to ever admit when they are failing until the bailiffs are literally carrying the chairs out from under them? Think about that next time you see a company making impossible promises while hiding their financials.